Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the OECD. It's great to have you all with us here today for this very interesting event that we are very proud to co-host with our friends and partners in the... I will get to that, but I want to first tell you what we are going to be doing here. We are going to be discussing the innovation in accessibility, a key pillar of inclusive and sustainable development. And I am delighted to have the honor to be your Master of Ceremonies here today. My name is Ragnheiður Elín Árnadóttir, or Raga for short, and I'm the director of the OECD Development Center. And as I said, we come together to explore how innovation, technology, and collaborative action can break down barriers, promote inclusivity, and ensure accessibility for all. And at the Development Center, we promoting inclusive societies, and at the OECD as a whole, is a core goal. And we are contributing solutions and analysis to advance inclusion for all. And to officially open this event, please join me in welcoming our Secretary General of the OECD, Matthias Cormann.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to the OECD. Madam Ambassador, Ms. Montchalin, Monsieur the President of APHPP, Mathieu Anero. I wanted to say a few words on this particular event on innovation and accessibility, a key pillar for inclusive and sustainable development. And this is being organized just on the eve of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. This event is a way in which to look at how accessibility can be a motor, a driver for development with examples of innovative technological development. Let me recall that people with disabilities represent 18% of people who are of working wage. We can help them, therefore, achieve their full potential. The share of people with disabilities who do not have education opportunities has, of course, been reduced these past few years, but we can still do further because this rate remains at 26 percentage points fewer than those with no handicaps. We need to also strengthen equality of opportunities, and we need to help handicapped people to achieve their full potential. We must therefore overcome all of the barriers in order to help them reach all of their opportunities in education, in society, and on the labor market. We will thus promote inclusivity and also solve labor-related problems related to population aging, and also reduce the cost linked to disabilities. In this regard, we firstly need to ensure public services for inclusive employment, and we need to do this by including and adapting our services to the people with disabilities. We can do so in designing adapted and personalized trainings for people with disabilities. In Norway, there's a Center for Adaptation for Work, which proposes specialized services for jobs with personalized therapies in order to help persons with disabilities and help them maintain, therefore, their jobs in the labor market. Secondly, we also need to favor flexibility in work, and in doing so, we can deploy one of the most efficient means which will contribute to protecting the jobs of individuals with disabilities in Austria and Belgium, in Canada, in Norway, and in the Netherlands, among others. There are flexible working hours, and this is in fact enshrined in the law. And thirdly, we need to promote innovation in order to promote inclusivity. The use of AI can help persons with disabilities in the work market. And a report on this matter that was published in 2023 illustrates that technology, in the ways in which technology can come to the help of inclusivity. There are about 142 examples cited in this report. In this regard, Canada's program for development of inclusive technologies seeks to fine-tune technologies and digital assistance mechanisms in order to adapt and in order to also use machine learning to better adapt assistance mechanisms to the individuals that need them. The OECD also is looking at supporting public action in implementing these priorities, and this is also being reflected in our new strategy that covers the period up to 2027. And our efforts are implementing recruitment systems that are inclusive, in order to consider disability in the workforce and in the workplace, and our online training on disability sensitization has seen a rise of 52% in the number of learners that have enrolled in these courses compared to 2022. The 2023 report on, of the OECD on diversity and inclusion also sets out the work plan for the first time that seeks to advance inclusion of persons with disabilities in various fields. We're also working on physical and digital accessibility, as well as in trying to keep our talents in-house when it comes to individuals with disabilities. Encouraging innovation and making accessibility one of our priorities will help us create inclusive environments and will also give all of the individuals the different tools with which they can work towards sustainable development. I wish you all extremely productive discussions today, and I look forward to listening to all of your debates. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to listening to the discussions and the results.
Secretary General of the OECD, and we are very happy to be organizing this event with two outstanding partners, the permanent mission to the OECD of France, represented here by the Ambassador Amélie de Montchalin, who's also the chair of the governing board, and also partnering up with the Association for Disability Inclusion in Public and Private Policies, represented here by Mr. Mathieu Anderot. And I will now give the floor to Amélie de Montchalin and invite her to take the floor.
Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, one and all. I think there's a lot of work to be done on inclusion because a few things weren't told earlier. I think you weren't told that, all of you weren't told that you can have interpretation.
You have headsets in your chairs, so as you can have French and English translation, and that everybody feel really included. L'autre chose est que quand on est malvoyant ou quand on est aveugle,
Another thing, if you have visual impairment or if you're blind, well, you don't see people and you can't actually recognize the people.
and not seeing us with their eyes, but only listening. So just before was the Secretary General. Juste avant moi, c'était donc le secrétaire général de l'OCDE, et je suis moi-même l'ambassadrice française.
And I am the French ambassador, and at the OECD, I am going to speak in French. Donc, si
That being said, je vais donc poursuivre avec mon petit mot d'accueil.
So it's just a few welcoming remarks, literary remark. Antoine Saint-Exupéry said this very beautiful phrase, if you're different from me,
Tu m'enrichis.
Rather than taking away from me, you enrich me. This is the literary version of what in French has become the small something that adds to your relationship and that brings value to your relationship. So this afternoon, I wanted to remind you, just a few weeks ago in Paris at the Place de la Concorde, we had the opening ceremony of the Paralympic Games. We had the singer Lucky Love, who spoke about My Ability, the song that was titled My Ability. And this song reminded us of how important it was for our differences to bring us together rather than have them push us apart. We were so fortunate to have 1,400 para-athletes among so many others who came to watch these athletes. And what a pleasure it was to show all of this on TV, broadcasted to the entire world, these 1,400 impressive athletes with so much perseverance who were able to show that sports was so different, their sports was so different to what we could have earlier imagined. I was fortunate to see the South African delegation play tennis in Roland Garros, and it was one of the tennis matches that I will remember forever. And these Olympic Games and Paralympic Games, in France especially, was a moment when everyone took stock or became aware of the differences and the fact that these differences didn't actually reduce the performance. On the contrary, it added to the sense of achievement. And now talking about the SDGs, in the 17 SDGs, there are 11 mentions of disability, including the SDG to do with the gender, poverty, hunger, etc. And yet, we all know about these 17 SDGs. Very few of us know as to how exactly how much the concept of disability is included in these SDGs. So the idea is to look at what's common between the countries of the North and the countries of the South, the developed and the developing countries. And this is really at the heart of the Center of Development and its works. And the idea is to exchange mutually, country to country, partner to partner, because we do have plenty to learn from each other. And we should look beyond just this sort of vertical relationship between countries. Why are we talking about innovation now? Well, this event that has come together thanks to the efforts of the OECD and all of the various teams that have been working for this, it goes beyond just looking at people on wheelchairs, people who come here with canes, people having interpretation in sign language, etc. We really are looking at trying to look at this small little trigger that can add to our landscape to achieve genuine inclusion, genuine innovation that can lead to further access to governance, access to public spaces.
Là où nous voudrions des petits trucs en plus. Et donc je répète cette phrase, si tu diffères de moi, mon frère, loin de me léser, tu
And so the quote that I earlier cited from Saint-Exupéry, I want that quotation to actually push us towards looking at not just in terms of what public policies, but also what all of us at a personal level can do in order to promote inclusivity. And to this end, I look at Mathieu Aneroux, the president of the association, who has been working so hard for this event. He said, Amélie, I have this project with this global vision. I really want this topic of inclusion to be an international event. And tomorrow, we're going to have a major event with MPs in France. And Secretary General, you said earlier that 18% across the world are in the situation of suffering with disabilities, sometimes definitively, sometimes temporarily. But all of these people can contribute and have the potential to contribute to our public lives, our political our policies in terms of health, inclusion, education, etc. So yes, we must innovate. We have the tools at our disposal to do so. And I'm so thankful that all of us, all of you have been persevering to work towards this project. And thank you to all of the people who have worked towards the organization for this event. And we will now hear from a lot of them. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Amélie.
Thank you very much, Amélie.
Thank you especially for saving the MC's blunder and informing about the translation and all of the opportunities that are here provided in order for us to celebrate inclusivity. My apologies for that, I should have said that in the beginning. But now I'm very pleased to invite to the stage Mathieu Aneroux, our good friend and partner, and as Amélie said, the initiator of this event, and therefore one of our trusted partners. So Mathieu, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le secrétaire général,
Secretary General,
Madame l'ambassadrice, chère
Madam Ambassador,
la directrice du Centre de
Director of the OECD Development Center, European Member of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, in your various capacities.
Je suis Mathieu Aneroux.
I'm Mathieu Aneroux, the President of the National Association for taking into account disability in public and private policy. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today for this seminar on innovation in accessibility, a key pillar of inclusive and sustainable development. Something which is of extreme importance. First of all, I would like to thank the OECD for hosting this event today, for the intensive collective mobilization of the OECD teams to prepare the event, and particular thanks to Federico Bonaglio and Julio Pepino, who have done a great deal to mobilize all of the teams to make sure that this seminar could take place in the best possible conditions.
Mesdames, Messieurs, 8 milliards
Ladies and gentlemen, 8 billion human beings live on our planet today. Among them, 1 billion live with disability. More than 15% of the world's population, among them 80% live in developing countries.
Alors, si on compare vis-à-vis de la population,
If we compare this to the global population, people living with disability more frequently run into health difficulties, have less access to study, have a higher level of poverty.
en situation de handicap,
People living with disability
nous sommes
suffer the greatest discrimination. This is the population that faces the highest level of discrimination. And yet, people with disability have that little extra, as the ambassador said, that little bit extra to contribute to our society and to our communities. That is why in 2017 we created the APHPP, the Association for Taking into Account Disability in Private and Public Policy, to defend people with disability in France and today beyond its borders, to propose improvement in public policy with regard to all of the relevant issues: accessibility, employment, education, sports, culture, to make all of these resources accessible to people with disability, to enable them to participate fully in society, including in political life. And this is something we will be addressing tomorrow in the context of these international meetings of the APHPP, which take place over 2 days. We have the seminar today at the OECD on accessibility, and tomorrow we will be discussing full participation in political life at the National Assembly of France. I would like to thank the foreign delegations who've been able to join us for these 2 days, and those who are still traveling to join us. Our friends from Niger, who should arrive at the end of the day. But we have people from Côte d'Ivoire, from Guinea-Bissau, from Germany, from Italy. And I'm no doubt forgetting some. We have from a delegation from Guinea-Conakry and from Senegal as well. This collective mobilization relates to all of these issues concerning disability: housing, transport and movement, access to employment, access to schools, to sports. Accessibility is the key word for full access to the rights of people with disability. It is inscribed in Article 9 of the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that France ratified in 2010. Accessibility is very much a priority and is a key issue in the OECD and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Working with people with disability directly is an economic imperative that is all too often forgotten by public and private actors. Climate and environmental upheaval has heightened environmental awareness within economic bodies, but at the same time the idea of universal accessibility must be taken into account as a mobilizing factor, a factor of inspiration, anticipating changes in our world, because first and foremost, people with disabilities are consumers of all of the products and services of society and must have access to them. Economic, legal issues, political issues, diplomatic issues are at stake here. And it is very much a political issue at all levels. In a few months here in France, in the context of the 2026 municipal elections, we'll be looking at the issue of accessible towns and cities, and this is something we should all mobilize around. We have French department issues concerning the sharing of responsibility between local and regional and national governments for accessibility issues, as is done in Italy and other countries. It's also a supranational issue. It is a worldwide issue that covers all countries, but it also requires coming together, a federation of international people with disability, something that shows that disability should know no borders. It is a diplomatic issue as well, so that bodies like the OECD and the United Nations really take ownership of this subject at the same level as they address environmental issues. Accessibility and the rights of people with disabilities must be considered a major worldwide cause. The United Nations Pact for the Future mentioned that the United Nations is behind in this issue, so major mobilization needs to take place with regard to these issues, which are determining issues for the society of tomorrow. I won't take too much time because I'd like to hand over to our experts, all of the panelists who will be presenting innovations in the field of mobility, artificial intelligence, and others, who will open us up to what other countries are offering. and to the collaborations that we can organize with these other countries in the future. But I would like to thank all of the volunteers of the APHPP who've contributed also to organizing today and tomorrow. Also call on the people who are present and who are attending this event remotely, thanks to Axeo, our partner. Call on you to join us, because it is working together in greater and greater numbers that we will push the envelope. I'd like to thank all of our partners who made this event possible. Uber, Okinea, Valentin Huy Foundation, among others. Thank you to the interpreters, sign language, and in our interpreting booths. I wish you very rich and inspiring exchanges and an excellent afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. This was very inspiring and sets a good tone for the discussion here today. And I also want to thank Matthias Kormann and Amelie for their interventions and for setting the scene for the panelists or the panels. We will have 3 sessions, and we will dive straight into session number 1, which is Europe and developing regions, a common fight for accessibility. And this session will be moderated by Angelica Salvi del Pero, who is an advisor in the Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs at the OECD. And I can't stress it enough how satisfied and happy we are at the Development Center to see that this is genuinely a whole of OECD effort, and we are bringing together the best and the brightest from many directorates in order to facilitate the conversation here today. And before I give the floor over to Angelica, joining her on the panel are Katrin Langensieben, who is a German MEP and advocate for accessibility, Idris Maija Al-Zuma, the president of the African Disability Forum, and Natalia Guala Bethait, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, the technical director of international relations at the Once Foundation in Spain. So over to you, Angelica. Please, the floor is yours, and I invite the speakers to join us.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angelica Salvi del Pero. I work in the Directorate for Employment, Labor and Social Affairs here at OECD, and it's my great pleasure to be joining you in this important panel on the common global fight for accessibility, where we will exchange perspectives on what needs to be done across the globe, and in particular in Europe, Germany, and in Latin America, with Katrin Langensieben and Natalia Guala Beatate. Thank you very much for joining us. Idris, unfortunately, is not able to join us. I think there were issues with transport, but we'll have a great panel nonetheless. The inclusion of persons with disabilities, as we've heard already, is a common challenge for both OECD and non-OECD countries. For example, across OECD countries, the employment rate for persons with disabilities stands at 45%, so almost half of the population does not have a job. And this is 27 percentage points above the average employment, below the average employment rate for people who do not have disabilities. and we've only seen very small improvements over the past 15 years. Employment, we think at the OECD, is a very important element of promoting inclusion in society and well-being for people with disabilities. Even in countries where there are solid benefit systems for persons with disabilities, still having a job makes a huge difference in terms of living above the poverty line and having higher income, of course. For example, 23% of working age adults with disabilities in OECD countries live in a low-income household. And this is 13 percentage points higher than for people without disabilities. So the incidence of poverty is an issue, and we do know that having a job is an important condition. But that's not all. Education is equally important, of course, in itself and as a path to inclusion through the labor market and more generally. The good news is that we've seen significant improvements in the education levels of persons with disabilities, but these improvements just track the same improvements that we've seen across the population. So we've not been able to close the gap. At the OECD, we believe firmly that people with disabilities must have equal access to mainstream education, mainstream employment, and mainstream employment services. It's imperative that the institutions that work with people without disabilities also are able to work with people who have disabilities. They must become disability competent and must be held accountable for providing equal support for people with disabilities. Truly promoting accessibility and inclusion requires a whole-of-government comprehensive approaches that go beyond employment and education and look, for example, at coordinate efforts to promote access to housing, transportation, and digital services. This means, again, that all these core services must be equally accessible. This lack of progress in advancing sustainable development goals for people with disabilities shared in OECD and non-OECD countries. And this is why we're talking today about both the experience in Europe and in Latin America. And we have here two panelists that will be able to tell us about what are the actions they see as needed in these places. So let me start with Catherine. Catherine has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2019. And she is the first woman member of the European Parliament with a visible disability. She has been serving on the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. No? Okay. And in 2022, she joined the Special Committee on the COVID-19 pandemic. Before her election to the European Parliament, Catherine had been serving as a member of the City Council of Hanover, and she has been actively advocating for reforms to the system of vocational training for people with disabilities. Catherine.
Hola.
Hola. Can you tell us more about your experience in promoting employability for persons with disabilities? And what do you think are the biggest success and biggest challenges in Europe when it comes to the inclusion of persons with disability?
That is a good question. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, that I'm here and that we have a European or cross-Europe international debate, and it's not only on on a local level, let's say, or member states level. That is, I'm really happy to be here. When it comes to inclusion and accessibility, first of all, we can say in Europe we don't have the perfect member state. There is no country where we can say, oh, that is a perfect country in Europe. If you go there, it's like heaven. No. And so we are in a good situation that we are away from shaming and blaming. No one is doing a good job when it comes to the UNCRPD. Next year, the EU Commission will be in Geneva. There will be a review or kind of a report how far is Europe or the European Commission when it comes to the UNCRPD. Germany is, when it comes to labor market, is not doing well at all. And here we have in Germany and several other member states, the problem of separated education and separate workplaces. And that is a long, long story. We know in Germany, during the Second World War, persons with disabilities got murdered, and the idea of how can we protect our children is very deep in our society. And what is a barrier? It's a culture. What is a barrier is a strong, strong belief that we need to protect our disabled children and our disabled 50, 60-year-old son. And that is now a system, we have 60-year-old system that is doing, in their eyes, a good job. But I was last year in Geneva when we had the German report, and the UN said, Germany, you're failing. So when we talk about supporting structures, where's the money going to? Are we investing funding, EFRE, ESF, all the European funds we know? Are we putting the money into an inclusive society project or to the good old system? And when it comes to money, it's a question of power, and no one wants to give the power out of mostly his hands. I compare it always with the women's rights movement. The argumentation is the same. As long as the society is not ready we cannot open the institutions. As long as I'm a politician, it's my job to change something. It's my job. And as long we can say, oh, society, another barrier, the society will not accept a person with mental or psychological or whatever disabilities, we cannot open the institutions. So someone is deciding how far in a society is. And that is a huge problem. And the narrative is in Germany, I think, similar when it comes to the labor market. France is similar. Spain is a good example here when it comes to the labor market. And so we keep in Germany people in poverty. If I have no money, she and he has a right to work, of course, but I can live from my job. Many, Germany, 300,000 more than persons work in sheltered workshops. And when we are against child labor and transparency where the product is coming from, why we are so emotional when it comes to, yeah, but they have a job, they do something, they have a daily structure. Yes, I have a daily structure, I'm here, it's my daily structure, it's my job, but I live from it. And that is ableism. Ableism to say, I am doing something for you. And when we talk about another barrier is when we hear the word disability, we hear the word burden, challenges, problems, costs. When we negotiated the European Disability Card, the first question I got from a very big company working on mobility, the first question I got was, who is reimbursing us the money? They knew it will cost something for us, and we are accepting the disability card only when we get the guarantee that we get a refund. First question, money costs burden. It's not about investment. It's not we are an aging continent. It's not about, oh, a person with disabilities, he or she buys a ticket. That the train in Germany is not accessible, that is another issue. But we are not seen as clients. We are not seen as mothers, as owners of. It is the same like we are doing something for you, and it gives you a very good feeling when you are doing something for the poor disabled people, doing something good. Especially now for the Christmas time, it's ableism. When we're talking about racism, anti-feminism, who knows what ableism means? And of course, no one here is ableist, of course not, no. Because we are always doing something good. And that is another barrier. Of course, we are talking about barrier where there's a ramp, where there's no lift, but the wheelchair-using toilet is on the first floor or second floor. When we talk about education, what about sign language? I'm running a hotel. I speak English, French, Spanish, but no sign language? How accessible is it for blind people? And that is when we talk about barriers, and I got the gold medal because all of that barriers. Where are we? The question is why we are now only 3 disabled MEPs in the whole parliament. You talked about the elections in France, the local elections. How many disabled candidates are there? We talked about barriers. Our town hall is not accessible to go to vote, but where are the candidates? The society is not ready for it. And that is, we break international law. And to have it crystal clear, we are not talking about the flowers and the bees here. We are talking about a human right. And I can blame countries that they violate international law, but when I look to my own member state, I say, you are not even better. And so barriers, the obvious barriers, but the cultural barriers. And here are examples when it comes to labor market. In Spain, we should ask companies, why do you produce Volkswagen, BMW, all the big countries? You let work in sheltered workshops. It's cheap. And they make loads of money with the public service as well. Where is money going to? We talk about public procurement. I would never ever support someone who's exploit people when it comes to that on persons with disabilities. We decided I'm not buying, renting, or supporting any kind of institutions. That is power I have. But I'm only one of 3 persons with disabilities. So to look behind the scenes and not only the ramp, that is not our problem, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this powerful message. We'll come back to it, but yeah, maybe I would want to know more about what you think after the next intervention about what needs to be done to change the culture a little bit then. So now let me give the floor to Natalia. Natalia Gualabeathiate is the Deputy Director of International Relations of the Once Social Group Foundation, and she has advised governments and international organizations on the effective implementation of the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Natalia has extensive experience of working with the Latin American region, and at once she coordinates the strategy for international partnership and institutional relations. Thank you, Natalia, for being with us today. We have heard some of the challenges that exist in Europe. Can you tell us more about how ONCE is working with Latin America to support people with disabilities and the policy action that you advocate to foster their inclusion in society?
Good afternoon. Thanks, Angelica. Thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the OECD team for inviting us to share our experience. I come from ONCE Social Group. It's a large organization in Spain. And I would like to introduce a little bit our organization to explain why we are here sharing this amazing panel. Once Social Group is, let's say, our brand that includes the 11 is the national organization of blind persons in Spain that was created 86 years ago in 1938. Then 11 Foundation that was created 35 years ago in order to work with all persons with disabilities in Spain on employment, on vocational training and accessibility as well. And the third area is called Ilunion, that is our group of companies or group of enterprises in the label market, in the global label market in Spain. Altogether, 11 Foundation and Ilunion are called 11 Social Group, and this is the fourth employer in Spain. We are more than 75,000 employees. 60% we are persons with disabilities. So in Spain, we are a huge organization, and we are an example that is possible, that many things that Catherine just said are possible if we are committed with the rights of persons with disabilities. So I would like to share with all of you our work in the international field, that, I mean, what we are doing based on our experience in Spain. We work in different ways in Latin America and the Caribbean region, also in Europe with the European institutions, and also in the MENA region in order to enhance the inclusion of persons with disabilities. Which kind of collaborations we are developing in these regions? We really think that it's very important to provide support, provide technical assistance to the governmental bodies, the ministries, for example, education or employment ministries, also agencies which are in charge of disability policies, for example. So we created 6 years ago a regional program in the Ibero-American region, which is Latin American countries plus Spain, Portugal, and Andorra, in order to provide this kind of technical assistance to these public bodies to improve their public policies and to help them to allocate budget, because it's very important to implement the CRPD, the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, not only improve the legislation, not only improve the public policies, it's very necessary ensure that the budget could afford these public policies to become these policies real policies and have a real impact in the life of persons with disabilities. Also, we work with the private sector because employment is one of the main important issues for everyone, but for persons with disabilities, as Catherine and Matthew said, it's one of the rights that allow us to be autonomy, to have an autonomous life. So we work with the private sector in many countries, sharing our experience with the employment of persons with disabilities. Now we are working with more than 60 enterprises in 5 countries from the Latin American region in order to help them to introduce, not only include persons with disabilities in their staff, also to introduce different kind of policies to change, for example, their buildings in terms of accessibility, to improve their communication from universal design point of view as well, because persons with disabilities, we can be employees, of course, but also we can be customers, we can be providers as well. So in order to see persons with disabilities as a part of the society, the private sector also should be included in this transformation. So also I would like to add another relevant actor in this conversation, that are the organization of persons with disabilities. We always say that nothing about us without us, and so it's very important taking account the organization of persons with disabilities. So we try to provide support to the organizations, to DPOs in these regions, in order to empower and build a strong movement, disability movement, not only at the global level, also at the local level in each country that we try to work. And fourth, I would like to mention another very relevant aspect in the international field, that is build strong international partnerships with other actors, stakeholders that are working in different areas, maybe areas that at the first moment we can think that are not connected with disability rights. However, everything are connected with disability rights, because we are part of a society. So we were working in the last 30 years with multilateral organizations like World Bank or Bank of Development in Latin American region, for example, with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Bank for Development for Latin American and the Caribbean, also, in order to introduce in their agendas the disability perspective. Also with United Nations agencies like UNESCO, UNICEF, or CEPAL as well, ECLAC, different agencies from the United Nations, in order to work together, because we really think that it's necessary involve all the stakeholders in this way, in order to ensure that the inclusion of persons with disability could be enhanced. So I think that this kind of collaboration not only could contribute with the participation of persons with disabilities in our societies, also contribute to improve our organizations. I would like to remark that that the OECD is organizing this event under the framework of the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, because it's a great step to think how the OECD could create or could incorporate a disability strategy in its work as well, not only internal in terms of include persons with disabilities in the OECD staff, or change the building to introduce or break down barriers in terms of accessibility, also to help all the members and the emerging countries or developing countries, to help them to introduce this kind of perspective in their public policy. So I think this kind of organization, strong organization, could provide a huge support towards these members in order to take into account persons with disabilities from a whole perspective, not only in terms of human rights, that is, of course, is very important, because more than 190 countries around the world have ratified the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, but also in terms of economical growth, in terms of development. So thanks again. Please take into account on the social group to work together in this way. And as I said, I'm really, really happy to be here and share this kind of experience. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalia. You will be happy to hear that, yes, the inclusion of people with disabilities in the labor market and in public services, it is an important priority for the work that we do here at the OECD. It is embedded in the work that we do. But yes, maybe there is there is probably space to do more to develop a real strategy, and we'll be taking that to our countries. So now it's time to give the floor to you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and get you a mic. While we wait for people to be less shy, I'll ask a question myself. So you said, you spoke, Catherine, about the importance of culture, and I said I wanted to hear more about this. So maybe both of you could say a word about an initiative or something that you thought worked to really change the culture in our workplace or in our society or in education. An experience that you lived directly and you thought that was positive and that helped improve things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question. The simple answer is the internet. When we got online in 1997 or 8, I met slowly other disabled people in my age, and I realized, okay, I came from a little village. I learned where my borders, my limits are, how I got educated, and I was the only girl with disabilities in school, and of course my place will be in an institution. And the internet came up, and I met people who said, oh, you are not alone. And that is the power we have. We have so many activists with so many followers on Twitter, X, or social media platform, and they are a voice. We have in Germany a very strong activist, this Spanish-speaking person, Raul Krauthausen, and he is a voice in Germany. He founded an association and is fighting. And if Raul says that's okay or that is wrong, then that's a voice. And people in my age or younger, and there's a next generation, they have power. And when you have 2 million followers, then you have the power. And it's not the answer for something. That's what I always hear is, when do we achieve inclusion? Say, easy answer, never ever. And that is the wrong way of thinking is, oh, it's a burden, cost money, when we are done. Never ever. Society is changing. I had opinions, I have opinions, I have views. Can be wrong. In 10 years, I could say, or I will say, in that time it was okay, but today it's wrong. And that makes it more complicated. Of course, we need standards. But when we still have that way of, not of investment, we have that way of thinking of burden and problems. Of course we need money for investment. A government must put money into the education system. It's not the flowers and the bees and for free. And, we have nothing else to do, and let's do something with inclusion around Christmas. So the internet opened doors for me. I could meet people. I could raise my voice. The media plays a relevant role. The media in the past didn't care about UNCRPD or prisons. We are not relevant in the public media. But on social media, we are there. And so where the changes, there are the changes. So, and there are achievements. I'm always optimistic, so I couldn't do my job, so that. Yeah, maybe my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Catherine. What about you, Natalia?
Well, yes. I would like to bring another idea about the technologies and the internet and this kind of tools, because as Catherine said, internet and technologies allow us to take part in the society. Was a huge change, but at the same time we have to be very careful, because the technology or then you will talk about artificial intelligence as well. So this kind of changes could be a bridge to include persons with disabilities in the societies, but at the same time could create new barriers if we don't think about the universal design, for example, or the accessibility. In the case of artificial intelligence, we have to pay attention, for example, the thoughts that are behind the AI, because as this AI is created by the human, so maybe can reproduce the discrimination, for example. So we have to think and to open this kind of debates in order to ensure that the technology could keep being a bridge in terms of inclusion, could help persons with disabilities in order to be more autonomous as well, and try to use these kind of tools in terms of useful things and not as a new huge barriers. So, for example, for blind persons, when social media or internet, social networks, and internet appeared many years ago, at the first time was a huge gap, because were not accessible for us, and we have to wait for some years, depending where you live. For example, actually I come from Global South, I come from Uruguay, so I had to wait for many years to have an accessible computer or to have an accessible smartphone. So it's very different from Europe, for example. So we have to pay attention, and also pay attention to the cost of the technology as well, in terms of, for example, when we talk about the Global South, and many times we think that the technology could be very useful tools, but maybe persons with disabilities cannot access to this kind of technology in terms of cost. So we have to have the global picture in order to take decisions in this way as well.
Thank you. Absolutely, yes. You're completely right that the design of the technology itself is of the essence here to improve inclusivity for people with disabilities, and more generally as well. And again, this is something that the OECD really insists on when we produce policy recommendations on the use of AI in general. So maybe I'll give the floor another opportunity to ask any questions. Let's see if there are any comments, reactions, violent disagreements. Please, Madame l'Ambassadrice.
Ok, bonjour, je vais poser ma question en français.
Hello, I'm going to ask my question in French.
Voilà. Je me présente. Moi, je suis Gémiment. Je viens de la Belgique.
Gémiment. I come from Belgium. I'm the president of the Europe-Africa platform.
Grande opportunité pour nous.
And this is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to participate in this seminar. I've been listening closely to our two wonderful panelists, and I wanted to raise a point myself. Today, our policies, whether it's what we're doing at the level of associations or elsewhere, focuses more on people with disability themselves and on governments. But there's something that we're leaving out, and it's the parents, the families. And I'm mentioning this because you've talked about society not being ready for accessibility, but who builds society? It's families that constitute our society, really. And today what we're neglecting at an institutional level is the families. Very often families are very much affected by the issue of disability because they have a relative who is disabled. People who have never known anyone living with disability will think, okay, well, maybe it's their issue, they have to deal with it. But we need to take into account families and relatives in policy. You've talked about the International Convention ratified by so many people, but you also talk about the difficulties with inclusion. We've talked about the initiatives that Spain is implementing, and that's wonderful, but we have a difficulty with regard to education. Education is not just a matter of what happens in schools, it's what happens also at the level of society, what happens in families, what relatives are communicating. The idea of respect, consideration, taking into account the requirements of other people, compassion, so that people become aware that when they have their own decision-making power, if they have their own possibility to have an influence on the situation, these are issues they should take into account. And I think this is the responsibility that we have in formulating recommendations, in making our own policies. We should support family-level education, education at the level of society.
I would like to make sure that you understand my French if I speak French. But yes, you were... J'ai été très touchée par...
I was very touched because you said in a way, when we try and protect children with disability, we're limiting them, we're putting constraints on them, and we're respecting these ideas more in appearance than in fact. When we talk about giving people access to employment and so on, I'll just give you an example from the Paralympics in France. I think that this was an occasion that really led to increased awareness. Performance, sport, something that was seen as perhaps a kind of absolute in society, was suddenly entirely seen to be accessible to people with disability. And I think that at the level of society, families, children, as the previous speaker was saying, changed their point of view on disability, and people living with disabilities changed their own vision of themselves, their own conception of what they could do and how other people may see them, how the rest of society might see their disabilities. So I'll say that in France, absolutely, we have not resolved all of these issues, but this was an instance of progress. Is this something that you've seen yourselves in your countries? This little positive vibration, is this something that has spilled beyond the borders of France as a result of the Paralympics, or maybe not?
You want to react?
Yes, it's true. The numbers are crystal clear on that. Thanks for your statement and the question. When we had, almost 10 years ago, there was a statistic with a question, would you ever date a person with disability? And before Paralympics, the answer was no. After the Paralympics, the answer was, well, why not? I saw some of them on television. Yes. So very important sector, the sports sector. But of course, how can we transfer that, the feeling, the success, the picture now we have into the daily life, education, workplace, and so how can we transform it, and that we must be very aware of sportsmen and women. They have high-tech wheelchairs in your daily life. You don't have that high-tech, super expensive wheelchair. To put it into a realistic picture, to say, moment of time, great games, but what now? Yeah.
Natalia.
Well, there are many barriers. Yeah, there are many issues that are not solved, of course, because the social changes are not easy, and at the same time don't happen only because of the convention. I mean, we can write a convention, we can write very good laws in every country, but this doesn't mean that the society is ready, as we were talking. But I would like to try to bring your attention that many changes are happening as well. I mean, the convention, for example, the convention was adopted in 2006, entered in force in 2008. We are talking 16 years ago. So it's the youngest international convention in terms of human rights. And again, we have a lot of things to improve, to change, but also many changes just are there. I mean, for example, Catherine and myself, we are here, and maybe 20 years ago we were at home, for example. So sometimes I'm a little bit optimistic, but I think that we have to be to push the changes to enhance the inclusion of persons with disabilities. So back to the issue, for example, in terms of inclusive education, we should involve all the actors, schools, politicians, families, students. The way is long, but we have to try to do unless a little bit, but we have to try to enhance or push the changes. We mustn't wait that everything could be perfect to produce the change. For example, from my point of view, the inclusive education is like a transitional way, but we have to try to walk the way, because if we wait for that everyone agree or everyone to be ready to the change, maybe never happen. Yes. So we have to try. We have to do something wrong as well, but we have to start working in this way and try to work together with those persons that are very committed with this change, and at the same time with others with maybe are not committed or are not convinced about that this could be useful for everyone, and see the results. Some experience in different countries, from the north, from the south, are happening, and the results are very good for everyone, for every student, and also for the teachers. So see these kind of examples, bring to the table, could help others to change their mind or their thoughts. So I think that we need to involve everyone, not only in education, in all of issues in terms of disabilities. Because as we were talking, this is a social issue. The disability rights are not only an issue for the person with disabilities, because we are part of the humanity. So we are the 15% of the global population. So our rights are issues for everyone. All the actors should be involved in this way, in this sense. And I would like to add another thought connected with this number, 15% of the global population. So each 7 persons, 1 is a person with disability. So if we think about our office, our school, our club, those places where we go to spend our holidays, for example, how many people with disabilities you can find in your daily environment? Maybe less than 1 of 7, I think. So the visibilization of persons with disabilities in our societies is the key. It's like the Paralympics game. When we see the persons with disabilities in a restaurant, in a party, in our work, in our club, we realize that we are another person only. So this is very, very important. So because this kind of huge events like the Paralympic Games or other huge events allow the society to see the life of persons with disabilities as a common life. So I think it's very important, and we, all of us, should try to promote this visibilization.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Very good. And with this, we'll move on to the next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that these magnificent panelists need another round of applause. What a panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now moving into session 2, which is going to be moderated by my colleague Federico Bonaglia, who is the Deputy Director of the Development Center. And this is on sustainable mobility for all, entrepreneurs and governments commit. And this session will begin with a presentation by Stefan Vincent Lancran. He's a senior analyst and deputy head of the IMEP Edu division, and a member of the DICE steering group, which is the Dialogue on Inclusion, Culture, Diversity and Equality, which is a staff-led organization here at the OECD. And joining Federico also on the panel are Lorraine Gardiola, Senior Manager of Uber in France, Martin Rochon, CEO of Okenia, and Diego Colas, Senior Disability and Inclusion Official at the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. Federico, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Raga. Pour la diversité et l'inclusion, on va faire ce panel en français.
We'll be conducting this panel in French, but a little bit in English as well. We'll see as we go along. It's a great pleasure for me to open this panel. We're a little bit late, but I think that this is not a bad thing. We'll do what we can to catch up a little bit because time is limited, so we'll be paying attention to speaking time. I won't do an introduction myself so that we save a little bit of that time. I'll just say that for us within the Development Center, this is a wonderful opportunity to
pour nous, au Centre de développement, c'est une très grande opportunité.
Talk about
inclusion.
We work a lot on the subject of inclusion in general, but we don't work enough. We almost don't work at all on the issue of inclusion and disability.
Important, un des produits les plus connus que le Centre de développement.
One of the most important products of the Development Center is the database to measure gender discrimination. And when we began to publish this index, the Social Inclusion Gender Index, we began to do so in 2016. I was part of the initial team, and we said it was impossible. We're never going to be able to measure norms, stereotypes, institutions that lead to gender discrimination. But now, in 2024, well, we've published 4 different editions of the CG. And this shows that when we want to do something, we can. I think, Stefan, you were also at the beginnings of this particular project. I'm not really sure in what capacity. And there was another project called PISA to measure education outcomes. And once again, we thought we're never going to be able to measure all of those aspects, but we were able to do so. And now, today, we produce data that help inform policies. And so, as was being said in the previous panel, we need to work harder on inclusivity, on persons with handicaps. We need to measure, and we need to look at barriers, and we need to look at what policies can help inclusion, can foster inclusion. So the panels that we have today are going to focus, though this particular one is going to focus on mobility. And let me hand over to Stefan, who's going to speak about the DICE Association. Thank you very much, Federico. I just want to make my presentation from the podium. My name is Stéphane Vincent Lancra. I am a member of the pilot group, which is called DICE, the Association for Dialogue, Inclusivity, Cultural Diversity and Equity. So this group is made up of volunteers from the OECD, and there are 3 different work streams on diversity, ethnic and racial diversity, on disability, and the third one on diversity in terms of socioeconomic origin. The idea was to look at all of these subjects in a systematic way in the OECD. So we're very pleased to be associated with this event, and this is the 3rd event of the type that's being organized in order to commemorate the International Day for people with disabilities. Last year, I don't know if you remember, we had different kinds of persons with different kinds of disability present here at the OECD, and we were able to take stock of what that actually looks like. And last year, we weren't actually go up and seen on stage with the help of a ramp, and this year we've made some improvements, as you can see. And we also worked on persons with neurological disabilities, neurodivergent persons. And so, as you can see, we're very happy to sort of widen our net and do different things compared to what was done in the past.
Sur la question du handicap,
Pascaline and Clara, two of our colleagues, in fact, have put up a few posters in the entrance talking about disability, and also have highlighted different individuals who have been working in politics, in art, in different kinds of fields to show, in fact, how the skills of persons with disabilities can be exploited, can be leveraged and used by everyone in society. And of course, the objective here is to make this topic as visible and representative as possible. But I also wanted to say a few words as a representative of the education division in the OECD. So, inclusivity is, of course, a huge topic in the sector of education, whether in terms of strategies and policies, how to leverage technologies to foster greater inclusivity, as was already mentioned earlier. And we're also well positioned to actually receive all of the criticism that was said, that was dealt out in the previous panel with regard to actual inclusivity on the field in daily life. So there is a sort of lack of progress, but there has been progress in terms of inclusion and in terms of acceptance level, social acceptation, etc. And what we're doing in our association is to look at the social perception of disability. And the Paralympic Games were indeed a very good example. We had a huge success on that front. But, well, sometimes you wish that you didn't need Stevie Wonder's musical genius to actually be included. So I'm very pleased to listen to what's being done tangibly, and I hope that at the OECD we'll be able to take a page out of your own books in order to deploy the various solutions that you'll talk about. Thank you very much, Stéphane. Thank you to all of your colleagues, Pascaline, Jocelyn, and all of the other colleagues who have been working on this event and on the show that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned a very important point. You said last year we organized a similar event and there was no ramp to go up on stage. And so you can see that that is indeed a very good improvement. Let me just look to Lorraine now. Lorraine, is that how you say it? Yes, okay. Lorraine Guardiola, who is a senior manager at Uber France, and who is going to tell us about accessibility in different means of transport. Sort of a little bit behind schedule, so if you can stay brief in your comments, that'll be very helpful. Thank you very much for inviting Uber to this event. Thank you to the APHPP. So we realized in Uber that 63% of persons with disabilities used taxis or chauffeured cars versus 41% who do not have any disabilities or who do not have reduced mobility. And so obviously this was a major issue that we needed to work on, because obviously this is the right thing to do. And also because we're a business and our ambition is to respond to all kinds of users and all kinds of, all typologies of demand. We began this work in 2017 with the creation of a product that is called Uber Access. In other countries, it's called Uber Wave, Uber Assist. And basically, this is personalized transport, which is an adapted car and a certified driver. And of course, this topic has grown in importance for us in Uber, as it did for other actors just before, or rather in the lead up to the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. And I think it was really the event that was a catalyzer, a sort of accelerator on this particular subject. So we adopted a consultation approach in Uber because we didn't know much about accessibility and inclusive transport. So we actually got in touch with the various actors in the French ecosystem, and first and foremost APHPP, which gave us plenty of great advice, and they also introduced us to other actors, and we worked on 5 major projects. The first project was to how to make the app more inclusive. A majority of persons with disabilities don't actually need Uber access, a certified driver with a ramp in the car, etc. Majority of people with disabilities actually just need their rights to be respected. So use a standard Uber app with a certified driver, but not necessarily an access ramp. And we realized that there were a lot of drivers that actually refused the service. So, for instance, you order an Uber car, and the car drives up to your residence and finds that you're accompanied by an assistant's dog, and then just refuses to pick you up. So we set up 3 major actions with the help of various associations, but also with the ministry in charge of disability, Geneviève Darcec, who was a minister back then, who helped us enormously on this front. The first action was to raise awareness among drivers. So with associations, we created a compulsory video. So all car drivers, Uber drivers, have 100 days to view this video. This simply reminds them of the good practices and also reminds them of the law. And if this video is not viewed by the cars, well, they can no longer connect to the app, and they can no longer generate revenue income through this app. So that was a major action, which was very, very successful. The second action was the creation of a mediation line. The Uber drivers very often begin to discuss with the passenger and talk about, well, no, you have to ask for an Uber access. Oh, no, if you have a dog, you have to choose the option Uber Pet, because we do have an option for domestic animals. And obviously, this is very complicated for the person with a disability, that they simply wanted a standard Uber car. And so this action, raising awareness action, led to reminding the Uber drivers as to exactly what their legal obligations were. And the third major action was to work with associations to kind of collect and take stock of all of the difficulties that the passengers did face, especially when they went to a police station to file a complaint against these kind of discriminations. And so we have specialized teams who are specialized in relationships with the law enforcement agencies, who are able to accompany the passengers in the process of filing the complaint. And of course, they're a priority for us. We treat these cases as a priority. And the result is that, well, today the video has been viewed by 45,000 Uber drivers. We do realize that there are lots of refusals still that are happening. 80% of the refusals are due to the fact that these individuals are accompanied by a dog. And the second major project that we're working on is to strengthen the Uber access offer. The vehicles are very expensive. The certification also has to be paid for by the drivers themselves. They don't have any public aid to get that certification, and so we've decided to fund this certification process. And so we're helping them to acquire these adapted vehicles. We have 250 car drivers that are eligible for this particular grant. I know that it's not enough, but I'm very happy to say that between summer 2023 and 2024, we increased by 1,000% the car rides by Uber Access. And the third major project that we thought was very important was on education. Who are the ambassadors of this subject? We forged a very great partnership with the para-athletes. We're very proud of this partnership. So these para-athletes are actually working with us to raise awareness among our car drivers and tell them, well, no, don't refuse the service, a car service to these people, this person with disabilities, because perhaps you're refusing the service to a major athlete, a major football player, a para-football player. So as you can see, a lot of work that has been done, but of course, many challenges that yet still remain to be dealt with. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lorraine, for this presentation. Let me now hand the floor to someone who works on the other end, i.e. on security of traffic. I think your company was at the forefront of creating audio traffic signals. So can you tell us a bit more about that? I'm not sure I understood very well that's what you do, but I'm sure you're going to explain to us better. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. I had a small presentation.
Je citerai Uderzo, tombé dans la marmite de l'accessibilité étant petit.
So just to continue with the reference to Saint-Exupéry, let me say that I, like Uderzo, fell into the sort of cauldron of inclusivity, if you will, when I was very young. So, a very quick
Très bien.
presentation. I'm wondering if this is going to work. So since 1993, we've actually been turning to persons with disabilities to look for inspiration in order to revolutionize mobility for pedestrians.
La mobilité des piétons. En 1980.
In 1993,
La question qui a été posée à mon père, c'était comment...
My father was asked the following question: how can you help a blind person to cross the road? And the answer for him was to develop a solution with the users. Don't do anything for us without us. And that is a slogan that we've adopted since 30 years now. And we're using sound as the response to the sound. And the audio traffic signal didn't exist 30 years ago. There had been some tests, etc., some audio that had been deployed in a few places, etc. So it was a challenge how to integrate new sounds on the street landscape, and how can the sound be a source of information for the users? The idea was to use a universal remote control in order to respond to this complex challenge, i.e. how to integrate sound. It's only when the user needs it that the user is going to press on this remote control, and he or she is going to get the information that they need. And this will sort of limit the noise pollution for the others, because that's what we've been talking about since the beginning of this event. What is an advantage for one person shouldn't be a disadvantage or an inconvenience for another. So we realized that we were on the right track, and so basically the pedestrian presses on this remote control, there's a sound, the traffic stops, and the pedestrian is able to cross the road, etc. And we were part of this project that ended up actually being enshrined in regulation, in legislation, and so that is a huge source of pride for us. There are more than 250,000 audio traffic signals in France. And
s'ils sont bien installés,
if
ça ne doit pas vous déranger.
all of these signals are are done according to the right parameters, etc., there is no disturbance for the others. There are some sound beacons, there are information terminals, and all of this can work with a simple remote control. You just press on this remote control and you use sound to sort of better orient yourself in the street landscape.
Il s'est posé une autre question.
Another issue was raised to us in 2014. How do you enable visually impaired people to orient themselves autonomously in the metro? And here, we thought about how cutting-edge technology could enable us to rise to that challenge. It had multiple dimensions. How do you guide a person using their smartphone? But guiding someone in the metro means
sous les sols et donc
you don't necessarily have access to the telephony network because you're underground. So how do you use precise location technology when you don't have direct contact with satellites? And this also raised GDRP issues as well. How do you identify people, give them information without asking them a whole lot of identity questions which could compromise their personal data? We launched a program, an application that we developed. We have about 25 people who worked on this for 10 years or so. You can imagine what this would have involved when you innovate. It's quite an effort. So we decided to use real-time geolocalization, which is what we identified as enabling us to guide users accurately underground. We have to be precise enough to be accurate. Below 2 meters underground, sometimes even deeper. Raises quite some complexities from a technological point of view. And we were entirely agnostic in our approach to technology. We didn't have any preconceived ideas about what technology we wanted to use. Cutting-edge technology is advancing extremely quickly, so we recognize that we'd need to be constantly adapting to developments. Now, this application, Evelity, is one that uses inclusive geolocation. It works indoors and outdoors. It can guide any user on the basis of their own particular needs and their own trip using their telephone. We needed to be precise below 1 meter underground, and we needed to guide them within a 1 meter range of accuracy. Very specific technological requirements to be able to provide the service to the greatest number of people. Now, lots of other technologies are very useful, text messages, remote controls for televisions that people use daily, but what we wanted to do was guide people underground, and we had testing across several cities, Paris, New York, in Canada, working to refine this technology to achieve our aim. I thank you very much, Martin. You have raised an issue that will be very important for the next panel. We have, for example, my colleague Yanis from the Science and Technology Lab. You talked about using technologies for mobility issues. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence later as well, and we'll see whether these kind of solutions are being used properly for these requirements. We have another panelist, Diego Colas, who is from the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. He is dealing with matters of inclusion and disability. What is the weight given to this issue in your work?
Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm Diego Cola, and I'm also the legal director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, and I'm responsible for handicap or disability and inclusion. This is a position that exists in all of the French ministries, and which in each ministry makes it possible to define interministerial disability policy. We have a committee, you know France, we've got a conference, a committee, a general secretariat, a whole structure, the objective of which is to deploy across all ministries a particular policy, a policy that is very much focused on accessibility. We'll be having a meeting of the Interministerial Committee on Accessibility very soon on the structuring of this interministerial policy. I'm going to be talking about two subjects because time is limited. I'll talk about the mobility of our officials in the context of our policy, and also talk about the mobility of students, which is one of my pet projects. Now, our policy with regard to accessibility and inclusion targets three categories in our population. Our officials, the officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, who are living with disability. We have various people who are within the ministry. And these are diplomatic careers where people are sent to other positions. They come back to the central administration. They're sent away to other positions. So mobility is a real issue. Another category are users in consulates, in embassies, but also schools, because we have many French schools around the world, and also the outreach issues, our advocacy efforts, and everything else we do to defend the rights of people living with disability, which I'll mention as we go along. We have three projects. I'll spend a minute on each of them to illustrate how we facilitate mobility among our officials. One thing that I realized when I've been working on these issues is that an initial matter is to communicate to people with disability that you can come and work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's entirely possible. So respect the 6% employment rate for people with disability, provide dedicated accessible entrance and facilities, and also communicate to these people once you've come into the ministry, when you're settled in the ministry, you can really expect to have a full diplomatic career, be sent abroad and so on. So we have a unit that's been set up in the ministry to ensure that we have specialized teams that we need for particular work positions can be transported to other locations, so that people who need those services can expect to be provided with the transport solutions necessary to be able to fulfill their career obligations. We have people who may rise to the post of ambassador in the future. A second issue concerns our infrastructure. We are supposed to be rolling out solutions to ensure that all of our infrastructure is fully accessible to people living with motor disabilities, but also visual and auditory difficulties. Doing that with all of our heritage classified buildings, so it's quite a challenge, but this is something that we're doing for our infrastructure. Another thing that I realized is that people living with disability don't necessarily, when they apply for a position, want to reveal that they are suffering from a disability. Why? Because it's often very competitive when people are applying for a position abroad, and sometimes people would like to be able to find out what is possible to them without necessarily revealing at that stage of an application process that they have a disability. So we're putting in place the necessary measures to ensure that each workplace presents the accessibility solutions that it offers, so that people can find that information out without necessarily having to declare their disability early on in the application process for particular jobs. All of these communication instruments are aiming to be available to people who consult officials in the ministry, but we also have all of our digitalization measures.
possibilités.
Deploying a whole range of options to carry out procedures online. That is something that is an advantage to citizens with disability who live abroad, but then talking about what we are doing for people with disability, that shouldn't be to the detriment for non-disabled members of society. These digitized solutions are something which are useful to all of our citizens. We had a consular official who was sent to Georgia in Tbilisi, the capital city, hundreds of kilometers away from France, who was able to benefit from these solutions. I have, I think, a minute and a half to go. I'd like to devote that to the subject of mobility among students. In the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in France, we have implemented measures to facilitate mobility for students with disabilities. It's our embassies, for example, which are volunteering. We have about 10 this year who have expressed interest in contributing to this project. So in many embassies, we have a cooperation attaché who works on educational cooperation and deals with international mobility. We've realized that for superior education, international experience is more and more not a luxury but an essential. So we have a policy for integration of students with disabilities in higher education, and that must also take into account this additional dimension of international experience. We are designating contact persons for mobility of students with disabilities to provide assistance. They support the implementation of structures in universities, but also providing support for peri-scholastic activities and other services. When somebody is looking to move to another country, there are many questions that will arise in dealing with a disability. So this is how we've also been working with our embassies over the past few months. We have about 10 embassies, as I said, that are volunteering to participate in the project. At least 3 have updated their measures and others are following suit. My hope is that this work with students and the issue of mobility can be extended beyond the issue of education of students. When we talk about students with disabilities and mobility, it can be perceived as being a benefit for rich people, but we're working to facilitate international mobility for students, and this is something which also has spillover effects, benefits for people who are not students. We have a disability map, for example, which involves people across Europe, goes beyond the context of students. We're going to be working on air transport as from next month. We have identified that there are various difficulties when it comes to air transport for people with disabilities, so we're doing work. If this is something that is going to be benefiting students in the first instance, it will extend and benefit other people as well. I might stop there to respect the time limitations. Thank you very much. Well, as you'll have understood, time is short. We're in a bit of a hurry, so could I suggest that you hold your questions for the next session, and our moderator for the next session will let you have that opportunity. So I'd like to thank our panelists. Just ask each of you to say very quickly, if we hold this event next year, what would you like us to introduce? What would you like us to do differently? What would you like to introduce that's new here at the OECD? What could the OECD do to address issues that are important to you? I'll begin. I think everybody needs to be able to come to this room autonomously, because in terms of signage and mobility, it was quite complex to find the entrance door to be able to navigate to the room today. Visual signage, the aesthetic signage is not good enough at the moment to guide everyone who needed guidance to the room. So perhaps next year you could look at improving that. Yes, I think when I mentioned that air transport was one of our priorities for next year, could I note your availability to participate in finding solutions, and perhaps we could deal with that next year. Yes, with regard to transport on request, providing solutions for people with disability, I think that public policy could do a lot in terms of providing funding for equipment.
Voilà, parce que je regardais encore hier comment les...
Yesterday I was looking at how the systems were working, and it's wonderful, but if you need exceptional transport, you need to book it the previous day or ahead of time, and you can imagine how that might be complicating life for some of our citizens.
Plus nombreux l'année prochaine.
Well, I hope that next year there'll be even more people in the room, and that more people will be aware of the event, and that everybody in the room who is here, who is living with disability, will be more comfortable in navigating to the room next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Another fantastic panel that brings ideas to our minds and solutions to our minds as well. Now, without further ado, we're turning into the third panel, and my good colleague Jens Lundsgaard, from the Deputy Director of the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate here at the OECD, he gets the panel with a cool name: Artificial Intelligence, the X Factor of Accessibility. We heard from Christine before that the internet in the 90s was a game changer. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Jens has to say, and joining him, please join me on stage, Jens, and the panelist, Jannis Tevisen, Chief Science Officer for Moments Lab and AI scientist. Please join us on stage. Philippe Trottan, the Director of Disability and Digital Accessibility Mission at Microsoft France. And Jona Velkers, public technologist who is joining us virtually. So please, Jens, the floor is yours.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Quelqu'un m'a préparé un petit discours en anglais.
Someone prepared a speech for me in English, but as I see that most of the people here are French-speaking, I thought it might be good to speak a bit of French.
Un exposé tout bref sur ce.
So I'll just do a very quick introduction with regard to what we do in the OECD. First of all, we have IA, artificial intelligence. You can see it already on the screen above my head, how well it works already. We can still make improvements, but it is a major progress for anyone who is hearing impaired, for example. This is a wonderful tool. And then there are many other X factors when it comes to technology, the connection between the brain and computers, for example, something which can be exploited to help people, for example, suffering from Alzheimer's disease and other conditions. It opens many possibilities, but it's associated with many challenges as well. Who is acting? Is it the person? Is it the algorithm? Is the algorithm taking over decision-making? We hear a lot about these worries and these moral and ethical concerns. It's very important to talk about them.
And this
is something that we do very well at the OECD.
Les expériences, sinon, sur le développement de ces technologies.
Is the experience with regard to the development of technology? What are the impacts on employment? In our Directorate for Social Affairs, we've been conducting analyses, and what we've seen is that there are many possibilities to help people living with disability in the labour market. Sometimes these technologies, however, run into the same difficulties as other technologies. Can we find investors? Issues of this nature. Because these technologies are serving a smaller population than some other tools.
les fonds publics pour aider les nouvelles technologies comme ça.
There may be a role for the public in supporting these technologies. We also have we have public funds that can provide support. The universities have a role in the field of pure science. Maybe they should be encouraged to pay more specific attention to people living with disability. We're seeing that there are algorithms sometimes that don't take into account the needs of people with disability that may differ from those of people without disabilities when it comes to accessibility. All right, well, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. We have 3 panelists today. Here on stage we have 2 of our panelists, and we have another with us online that you can see at the top of the screen. First of all, I would like to turn to you, Yanis Tevissen. You are in charge of the Moments Lab, and you're working on research on artificial intelligence. And I'd like to ask you to tell us what are the risks and the opportunities associated with artificial intelligence when it comes to inclusion of people living with disability.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to thank APHPP, Mathieu Henro, and the teams at the OECD for organizing this event. And I am very pleased to inaugurate this ramp that was set up for this stage. But to come back to the subject of AI, personally, I'm convinced, as a user as well as a person with disabilities, but also as a researcher on AI, I'm convinced about the benefits that AI can bring. Firstly, I think there are going to be new interfaces, vocal interfaces namely, that allow for much greater inclusivity in all kinds of IT tools, smartphones, computers. So I think that's going to be fantastic. I myself use them on a daily basis. And there are other solutions when it comes to following your eye movement that also allows for much greater accessibility for a large diversity of individuals. AI for me and machine learning offer this possibility of hyper-specialization. So there's a statistic model, and in that you integrate a number of data that represent various kinds of realities, realities that involve people that are completely able or people that have disabilities. And so from this data, from text, from audio, from video inputs, etc., that you send to AI, AI can train the model and thus respond to these very specific needs. But the problem, of course, because there are problems, the problems comes from the fact that we don't have enough access to diverse data at this point in time. As you can see, perhaps in this room itself, there are different kinds of disabilities. And with the same kind of disability, for instance, your experience as an individual can be very different. And you might have different needs in terms of tools and in terms of what solutions this AI can offer. So the point I wanted to make here is that the idea that there has to be better access to data that is more representative of people with disabilities is, I think,
as a researcher that is most important. I know that it's very complicated to have this access, and I think there needs to be a lot of work done by public organizations to allow for better access to this kind of data. And then, secondly, I'd like to talk about biases. I'd give you a few quick examples of biases. The first bias I wanted to talk about is fairly simple. I'm sure you've all ordered something on an e-marketing platform, a particular product that you wanted to buy, and if when you write a comment or a review on a particular product, there are some algorithms, some AI models that are going to read what you have written as a user, and they will give you a positivity or a negativity score to your review, and based on this score, the product might or might not be presented to the next user. Some researchers in the University of Pennsylvania realized that very often when you speak about a disability in a particular review, well, the product will be considered as being more negative than other products. That was in fact, one of the biases that was mentioned by MP earlier. Very often, disability is associated with negative connotations, but very often, but when you do write a review for a product that is actually helping someone with disability, well, it's sort of counterproductive if your review is not helping that product gain visibility. Another example, I'm sure all of you have heard about ChatGPT, this huge language learning models that are now being used almost on a daily basis by people in companies and in other kinds of environments. And researchers have shown that these models are incapable of detecting ableist biases. I'm not going to go into the details of what is an ableist bias, but it's quite striking. And the fact that these models are used for moderating social media is quite striking. So there's a huge risk that the entire population be exposed to this kind of bias. And one last thing to tie up with something that was said earlier, and that I want to emphasize on, these biases don't spring out of nowhere. They come from data that is used to train these models, or the way in which AI models are trained. So this means that a lot has to be done in order to make sure that all the users are aware of these biases, and also that the stakeholders involved in the development of these models are aware of them. In France, for instance, only 2% of people with disabilities actually are in higher education, particularly in scientific and technical education. Compare this with the 15% of the persons with disability in the general population. Well, you see that there's a huge problem, and that probably is where the biases come from when it comes to the AI models.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
On se tourne vers vous.
Now I'm going to turn to Philippe Trottin, who is director of Microsoft France.
Les plus grands succès que vous avez eus.
What are the huge successes you'd say you've had in your company, and what are the challenges when it comes to accessibility? Tell us about your project. Thank you. Let me describe myself. I am a male. I'm about 55 years old. I have gray hair. I have I'm wearing a black suit, and this is actually a very American practice. We almost always begin our presentations like this in order to promote inclusivity, and this is part of our culture. And we spoke about the culture of inclusivity in companies. In Microsoft, in all of our annual individual objectives, we have to contribute to something to do with inclusivity. It can be to do with disability, it can be to do with women, etc. That is an obligation in the company. Now, coming to AI, well, I'm not going to use my slides, in fact. AI is not something new. It can be traced back to 1950, but it was only in the 1990s that we were able to build machines that were capable of apprehending AI. And of course, there is the issue of bias. Let's start with a few examples. When we started vocal dictation in Microsoft Word, the vocabulary that was used was very different when the French that was used in Canada was dictated to Microsoft Word compared to the French that was used here in France. And so this is something obviously that can be solved with training, with time. Time for the machines, but also time for the human beings, because, of course, all AI needs surveillance from human beings. Human beings need to come in, intervene, and correct the models, etc. In the same way that we learn things in schools, where there's a teacher that says, well, there, you've made an error. In the same way, human beings have to train the machines and correct the machines. And so we have a huge task ahead of us to correct these models and correct the way in which the trainings are undertaken. And there's data coming from the web, data coming from daily exchanges in your emails, in the files that you create, etc. All of this information can be indexed. So in the morning, when I come into my office, I can simply ask the AI to identify the important things that I have to work on today. And so the AI on my machine is going to actually sift through my email and will create an agenda for my work. So this is something that can be used to reduce the sort of mental overload. Can also be used, for instance, with individuals that have attention problems, etc. So AI has been around for about 8 years now in daily life items, daily life tools. You were talking about subtitling, automatic subtitling that you can have in PowerPoint. You have subtitles, but also translation. So this is very good for inclusion. You can include people with hearing impairments, but also include persons that have different languages and who need to communicate together. You were speaking about data and the difficulty in collecting data. Let me give you some examples. There are some businesses in France that are trying to automate French Sign Language. But to do this, you need lots of videos, lots of transcripts in order to train a model. But inasmuch as we don't have these data, well, we cannot come up with solutions. And when we don't have a solution, we can't actually go behind the solution to identify the potential problems that can come. We have the possibility to have an interpreter here, but in all of our meetings, unfortunately, we don't have the possibility, especially in the private sector, to have a sign language interpreter who can translate the entire meeting. So we do need to be able to automate these kinds of solutions. So a lot of work being undertaken in terms of education as well. And that's a major issue. First and foremost, because the youth aren't exactly made aware of disabilities. In one of the previous panels, we were speaking about families that haven't been in contact with situations involving disability. So a lack of awareness in families, in companies as well. When you speak about neurodiversity, for instance, people look at you with wide eyes, wondering what exactly you mean by that. And
there are different kinds of disabilities that are less well known in companies. When you speak about mobility, you speak about access to buildings, but you're not exactly talking about access to the digital environment. So lots of invisible disabilities as well. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that to raise awareness among the young and to educate them. I am a teacher as well. I give out classes for a master's program, and I'm able to see firsthand what these young people actually have as in terms of reactions, whether it's positive or negative reactions in terms of coming face to face with disabilities. And there are also situations where you speak with the persons with disabilities to whom you present some solutions that AI proposes, and you work with them to develop these solutions further. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we're looking up to the screen at you, dear Jonna Welker. You're a technologist. And could you tell us more about AI technologies, what it can do, what good it can do, and what it brings to the table when it comes to including people with disabilities, and tell us a little bit about the risks as well.
I would love to share a perspective both of EU-funded projects and transatlantic, the dialogue on assistive technologies. Currently, we're really in very special times because just right now, the EU office is working on the code of practice, is the document which will reflect the systemic risks of AI systems and how organizations could practice the AI in a more efficient way in order to make AI actually practical document. But it's also important that it comes in parallel with the more than 4 billion investments in infrastructure, 14 areas of generative AI technologies, models in public administration, regulatory sandboxes, so-called test beds, dedicated safety models. And the big question, how all of these things could affect the taxonomies of assistive technologies, because since 2021, organizations, public, EU Disability Forum, UN, actually pushed the Commission be more specific about AI Act towards assistive medical technologies, biometric, facial and emotional recognition systems, the cases affecting refugees and immigrants. And that's why today, along with the AI Act, we actually have a overlapping between a few EU acts, including not only AI Act, but Digital Services Act, GDPR, and we have articles which actually address disabilities and assistive technologies. In particular, for classification and taxonomies, we have an Accessibility Act and Standardization Directive. For data profiling, manipulation, addictive design, we also have an overlapping between AI Act, Digital Services Act, and GDPR. We also finally have discussion about high risks for systems related to certain critical infrastructure. And for sure, here we also mean medical devices, hospitals, systems which determine access to educational ecosystems, institutions, or dedicated to recruiting people, law enforcement. We also finally try to understand the so-called specific transparency risk. Then AI systems should notify people then algorithms are actually used and being clear for patients, for caregivers, and involved stakeholders. But what we can do in order to improve it even further. So on one hand, we should improve taxonomies and repositories of technologies. And last year, we had an amazing opportunity to cooperate with the OECD to create the report. And that over 40 emerging technologies and companies, including EU-funded projects which address not only physical but sensory and cognitive accessibility. And by the way, EU now is one of the leaders in the area of cognitive and sensory disability technologies addressing autism, dyslexia, attention deficit. It includes so-called social robotics or assistive technologies for education. But it's very important to understand with all of these opportunities, we have many risks related to accuracy. In particular, we have recognition errors, then individuals with the facial differences or asymmetry, craniofacial syndromes, just not recognized by systems properly due to the lacking limbs or speech impairments. At the same time, users with disabilities can properly identify the signals from the systems. For instance, then the system use visual or sound cues, or we have a historical biases exist in the data sets and related semantic errors or so-called excluding patterns. And finally, and this issue was actually raised by United Nations, some public system can recognize individuals with used assistive devices and sometimes even wrongly identified as a weapon. And it's specifically important for a humanitarian refugee in immigration context. Another thing we should understand that AI is not monolith. It's presented by different models and machine learning approaches, and that's why for supervised learning we have errors which constantly presented by human-induced errors during the selection, labeling, or existed in pre-trained models. For unsupervised learning, we deal with a statistical lack of input, representation, or disparities. For instance, when we deal with a medical solution, DNA data clustering for medical solution, or for reinforcement learning, typical for robotics, for social assistance, and for social agents, we deal with the limitation of existing training environments. And for sure, one of the biggest problems we have is a lack of data points which just do not exist for certain groups, identities, or communities, or people who collect or label data may introduce subjectiveness during the reporting, the selection, or introducing systemic or group attribution errors. And another thing, and one of my final words, that currently we're only focused on software. We speak about AI models, but we forget that now AI presented by robotics, by assistive devices, by bionic technologies, it also involved motion and sensing component safety, such as service and kinematics components. It also involved power components and environmental safety, including batteries and other forms of energy. It also includes the safety of production in training cycle. And finally, we should understand that disability-centered deployment of assistive technologies is not a monolith. It's a multimodal and multisensory involving visual, hearing, and cognitive parameters. It's modular. It may involve interconnected devices, interfaces, caregivers, parents, teachers. It's also multi-stakeholder. It requires identifying the scenarios of a misuse, actions and non-actions, so-called omissions, manipulation, addictive design, and for sure, it requires the transparency of the data, models oversight, privacy, and consent. Thank you so much, and we hope to introduce all of these things to the next iteration of the Code of Practice and AI legislation. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Jonah.
Thank you very much, Jonah Velker.
Pour tout le monde, des réflexions, des questions.
And now I'd like to open the floor for debate. Any questions, any comments from the floor?
Oui, bonjour André Bergeau.
Good afternoon, I'm André Bergeau.
Je dirais même de philosophie.
This is more of a philosophical reflection on accessibility. With technologies, we can augment and simplify the life of people living with disability.
Une excuse pour ceux qui devraient rendre la vie.
Is this perhaps also not an excuse for simplifying life for everybody, for encouraging everyone to slow down in their investments in order to work on making our cities accessible to everyone?
Deux questions et...
All right, we'll take both questions from the floor and then we'll respond.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. I'm Philippe Cortez.
Je constate aujourd'hui que les
I
handicapés
observe today that people with motor disabilities, visual disabilities, deaf people have great good fortune that people are looking after them and their needs. But there's another disability that we don't hear a lot about in this kind of event, and it's a shame. We don't hear a great deal about it in other situations either. And there are 6 million people affected here, 10% of the population, 10% of the world population, I believe, as well. I'm talking about all of the people who are losing their hearing, what we would call hearing impaired people. They are not fluent in sign language, but often they're in a state of distress that's not easily comparable to other disabilities. Sometimes people say, this is not always accurate, that people with visual impairments are happy and people with auditory impairments are sad, because auditory impairment supposes a huge deficit in communication. You can't watch television, you can't hear it unless the subtitles are accurately synchronized, which happens only rarely. You can't listen to the radio, you can't just drop into the local cinema and watch a film. You can't communicate in a meeting. In a family context, life is very difficult. It generates a lot of isolation. It's a real disability. And this disability is something that I think needs to be much more widely recognized in the world of disability in general. So this is not really a question, it was an observation. Because the 6 million people suffering from hearing impairment is a considerable number. And then we see all of the hearing aid boutiques that are mushrooming across our cities and our streets, and I believe that there's a reason for that. Selling hearing aids is good, but recognizing the disability would be even better. Thank you for listening. Well, thank you very much. Well, here above my head, you can see something that helps people with auditory impairment, because it takes into account what you've said. Yes, could I respond perhaps? With regard to hearing impairment, because it's the perhaps leading cause of disability in companies today. Many of these people are not deaf from birth. They're people who have been progressively losing their hearing over time. We've worked a lot on solutions, subtitling, surtitling, and so on, translations. And today, with AI or generative AI solutions, there's even the possibility during a meeting to ask questions on the meeting content. If you didn't hear what someone said, you can have a tool that says, can you transcribe what Philippe said during the meeting? And the machine will automatically go and find what Philippe had said during the meeting from the transcript and give it to you. So we're working progressively to provide solutions for these kinds of difficulties. And then in meetings, how many managers will be activating that kind of automatic subtitling during the meeting? Well, that's a question of changing mentalities. People who don't think about it will not automatically switch it on. I don't make any interventions without checking that the automatic subtitling is active myself. Yes, there was also a philosophical reflection. Well, yes, I fully agree with what was said. I've experienced all of this myself, not necessarily relating to artificial intelligence, but it's already been explained to me that I couldn't attend a given event because it was inaccessible. It's not a problem because they said I could follow it using VR, virtual reality. Well, you might, of course, be aware that it's not the same thing. Virtual reality is not something you can follow in the same way that you follow a direct event, where you can talk with people immediately, you can have an interaction. So I think that this is a real issue for society as a whole, for users of technology in general. Technologies are wonderful, and I'm the first to recognize that fact, but they should be used to strengthen policies and real solutions of accessibility. Yes, just to add some information with regard to accessibility, there's something where we're going to be working to automate accessibility as much as possible. I'll give you an example. If you ask AI to describe an image, if you did that 2 years ago, the quality of the description was quite poor. If you ask ChatGPT or Copilot or any of these other solutions to describe an image today, the precision of the description is wonderful. It goes well beyond just a simple summary of the image.
Yes, could you kindly repeat the question?
So there were, in particular, a question about when we develop all these tools that can help to enhance accessibility, does it mean that the efforts, the investments going into making everything accessible without tools, that those would diminish?
Yes, so first of all, I believe the whole discussion about assistive technologies can go separately of a question of accessibility in general. For instance, 50% of children with disabilities in emerging countries have no access to elementary schools. Or only 10% of the global population have access to assistive technologies, very simple technologies, not even AI or robotics. So we can't actually eliminate the question of AI infrastructure or complex models, not discussing the economic or social matters. So yes, I believe they're all coming in parallel, and we can't fix the social problems only working on technical problems. Actually, we have even the name for such approaches. It's called technical fixes. Then we believe that we can fix social problem with this technical solution, but it's impossible. The problem of a representation can be resolved through technology. The problem of intersectionality, when we need representation of women, because we have some specific conditions which are unique in terms of manifestation, in terms of required analytics in data, we can resolve it without institutional changes. So it should come in parallel, in my opinion.
Thank you. Quand je regarde mon montre bracelet, le temps est passé.
I'm looking at my watch and I see that time is passing, but do we have someone who has another question for us?
Frédéric.
Yes, hello, I'm Tanguy Frédéric.
J'avais une question, on va
I
dire,
had a question
plus philosophique que celle.
that's even more philosophical than the one that Andrea asked.
Si vous connaissez tout ce qui va être
I don't know if you know
en fait, on va dire,
about the field of transhumanism.
comme auteur. Eh bien, du coup, j'aurais une question. Donc,
But I have a question
pour Monsieur le professeur.
that's perhaps more for the professor. Along these lines, what do you think about transhumanism
Le cas du handicap.
in the context of disability?
Wow.
Wow. Well, a vast subject here.
Je pense que comme partout, il y a deux enjeux.
Well, I think that there are two things at stake, as everywhere. First of all, there's the issue of science and technology, what we know how to do, what we're capable of doing.
Très grandes choses, des choses.
Maybe we'll be able to do wonderful things that may go beyond what we're capable of imagining, or what we see in some of the science fiction films. But on the other hand, there's the issue of regulation, what we authorize ourselves to do. If I'm taking the example of cloning today, we're all well aware that we're able to clone animals. No doubt we'd be able to clone people, and yet as a society we forbid it. I think that with regard to transhumanism, we have the same kinds of issues to think about. We might be capable of creating neuronal interfaces, very complex cerebral interfaces based in part on artificial intelligence. Some are already doing this. If you look across the Atlantic, there are companies like Neuralink that are very well known that are managing to implant chips directly into people's brains that enable these people who've been chosen because they have a disability to more easily control using their thoughts certain digital tools. Now, this is fairly rudimentary for the time being, but it's been approved in the United States as a use of technology. And I think it really raises a regulatory and a philosophical issue for society as a whole. If we take that further.
La phrase que Brad Smith, donc,
yes, well, I would quote Brad Smith, the number 2 in Microsoft. We shouldn't ask what technology can do, but what it should do. I would cite that in response. Well, thank you very much. A very interesting session. I've learnt a lot. I remember at one point when I had a neck problem and I went to see a doctor and I asked what to do, and he said, above all, don't stop living. And I think what I would say with regard to these big philosophical questions, transhumanism and others, I would say use technology, but above all, don't stop being human. All right, let's turn back to you, Raga.
Federico.
Federico, rather.
You were a perfect moderator, and thank you very much to the speakers. We are coming to our last session, so we have 2 videos, short videos, of 2 examples, of 2 témoignages, to say it in French, that we are going to project shortly, and then we will move to discussing what the OECD as an employer is doing to promote inclusion and diversity. So before that, if we can, colleagues on the back. So I will just introduce the 2 videos, and then also invite, maybe before you turn it on, and also invite Zara, if you can, to join us on stage. So before showing the video, I would like to invite Zara to say a few words. We will then project the videos. Then we have the head of human resources. I mentioned Daniel, and Daniel appears. So he will tell us more about what the OECD is doing to promote inclusion, and then we will move to the concluding remarks, and there will be a little social event outside for everyone. So we begin with Zara, then we have the 2 videos, then we give the floor to Daniel, and then we close. Zara, please.
Bonjour à tous. Déjà, je voudrais,
hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for being here this afternoon and for giving us the opportunity to talk about the issue of accessibility. Thank you to the OECD for hosting this event. And thank you to the APHPP and particularly Matthew for enabling this debate. As you can see and as you can hear, I am in an electric wheelchair. I'm affected by disability myself from birth. I have a neuromuscular difficulty. And I use a wheelchair for mobility. Accessibility is something that's very dear to my heart, obviously, for that reason. But we've been talking a lot about accessibility in physical terms. But, and so we've been thinking about traffic lights, we've been thinking about accessibility in a practical, pragmatic sense. But accessibility requires us to have the solutions available in mind when we think about solutions, whether they're legal, whether they're medical or political. It's something that reflects geographical availability, but it's also a conceptual and ideological concept. That is where the idea of universal accessibility seems to me particularly relevant. Universal accessibility concerns people living with disability, of course, but you should never forget that disability can be something that somebody is born with or acquired through a lifetime because of a particular social, economic, environmental, or ecological, or even a psychological context.
le représentant du ministère.
The representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France earlier was saying that by making planes available to disabled students, the aim was to democratize air transport for all people living with disability, not just students. But it's also something that we need to think about for older people or people who become disabled over their lifetime. We shouldn't think about disability as representing a category of people. Disability is something which should be seen as something which requires us to provide solutions of accessibility and autonomy. Universal accessibility is not just a physical question, but also one or a philosophical or a psychological solution or question. I think that if we adopt this kind of approach, we'll always be able to choose the most appropriate solutions, the most environmentally suitable, the most economically worthwhile solution. We have people abroad who are going to be joining us by video here today. The first is Maria Fernanda Montoya from Mexico. She'll be talking about accessibility in her country. And she'll be highlighting territorial differences, but also accessibility difficulties with regard to the transport system. She'll also talk about accessibility as a means of compensation and say that we need assistance not just for people living with disability, but also for caregivers and people providing support. All of the technical and technological solutions need to take into account these imperatives. We will also be hearing from Mehdi Mhari, who is a doctor of economics and a university professor. He will be talking about accessibility in innovation and the high cost of some solutions that exclude many patients suffering from illness or disability. All of this encourages us to question our economic model with a view to modifying it to ensure that it meets our requirements in terms of inclusion. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Zara.
Thank you very much, Zara. I forgot to say that you're not just a volunteer at APHPP, but also a PhD student in EU rights at the Center for Studies and for International Research and Community Research. Now we're going to look at 2 videos, and then we'll talk about what's being done internally at the OECD. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Maria Fernanda Montoya Sanchez, and I live in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. I hold a degree in communication science and technique with specialization in digital journalism, graduating from UNIVA. Currently, I work as an ontological coach, and I am certificate in neurolinguistic programming and emotional intelligence. I'm also mindfulness instructor. For years, I have been an activist advocate for the rights of the people with disabilities. Through this work, I have released numerous gaps that exist even within the law's means to ensure the implementation of these rights so that people with disability can live more autonomously. I live with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which requires me to use a wheelchair. This has given me a first-hand understanding of the many irregularities in matters related to disability and inclusion, particularly in the areas of personal assistance, universal accessibility, and transportation. In my country, 2 laws, 1 state, and one federal, are responsible for safeguarding the rights of the people with disabilities, both of which are based on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These laws are the Law of the Inclusion and Development of People with Disabilities in the state of Jalisco and the General Law for the Inclusion of People with Disabilities. I conducted an analysis of both laws and convention, and I discovered that they urgently need updating. Some concepts established in the convention are absent from Mexican laws, such as personal assistance for people with disabilities. Additionally, there is no regulation mandating universal accessibility in public works, infrastructure, and construction, whether federal or private, nor are penalties for failing to meet this accessibility standard as outlined and in accessibility manuals. Regarding transportation, it should be mandatory for concession companies to provide staff training and establish a complaints department to address cases of poor service by employees or malfunctioning facilities such as elevators. Guadalajara has the most accessible transportations in the country, like rail, microbus, and urban buses. However, it's not fully functionality due to service issues and the failure of support systems like elevators and easing off the unities of these unities. My city lacks awareness, which leaves me feeling frustrated and truthful. States like Yucatan and Cancun have invested in accessible tourism projects, but sadly, their egos have negatively impacted this population, and no one has spoken out. In Cancun, they eliminate accessible transportation service because they saw it an expense rather than investment. Instead for extending it to benefit the entire population, there shows discontinuity. However, Yucatan currently offers high-quality, accessible transportation, and I hope they expand it through the state, setting an example for the rest of the country. Thank you very much for letting me share my experience in these topics in Mexico, and it's an honor for me works with you, and I hope see you soon. Keep in touch. Thank you very much. Bonjour.
We can now move to the second video, which is from Morocco.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me. We're going to talk about access to innovative medicines and drugs, especially medicines for rare illnesses, which concerns more than 3 million people across the world. My name is Mehdi Mrahi. I am a professor of economics in a university in Morocco. Let's now talk about the benefits of these rare medicines on health. These medicines help to extend by 35% the life expectancy of those suffering from this disease, and also help to contribute to the betterment of the quality of their life. Innovation also helps avoid expensive and complicated surgeries and also reduce the number of hospitalization days for these patients. And exclusion of persons with disability accounts for between 3 and 7% of costs, and innovative medicines can help reduce this cost. Therapy innovations and medical innovations can also help increase female participation in the labor market. 50% of new approved therapies in the US that were approved in the US and in the EU, while only about 50% of them are accessible in North Africa and in the Middle East. You can see on this graph that there's a huge discrepancy between countries such as Germany and countries in my region. So, how to encourage the pharmaceutical sector to look into rare illnesses? And these past few years, the National Organization for Rare Disorders in the US has been working to help adopt the Orphan Drug Act. And this law was adopted in 1983. And this gives a tax credit to companies that work on rare illnesses, and also an extension of the patent so that the companies can make this particular product more cost-effective. In many countries, there has been a lot of demand for the reduction of the prices of innovative drugs, especially illnesses such as HIV, AIDS. There are several associations that are also working for better recognition and better reimbursement of innovative drugs.
In the United States, only 10% of people suffering from rare conditions manage to obtain medication. There are a number of obstacles, bureaucratic, for example. In Morocco, we have difficulty importing some of this medication, which leads to lives lost. We have bureaucratic obstacles with regard to commercialization and marketing of certain medications and their authorization. There are barriers in terms of the training of personnel and a lack of appropriate equipment. The main barrier to access to new treatment is cost. As you can see, we're breaking new records every year in terms of the cost of these treatments. Here, we see a cost of $2.13 million for treatment of SMA in 2019. For leukodystrophy, $4.25 million. In Germany, for this reason, a law was adopted placing a cost limitation on some of these medications. Among the reasons for these obstacles is the limited market penetration of these medications. When we have ultra-rare conditions, sometimes patients are left entirely to their own devices. The cost of research and development and innovation in therapy is of $2.5 billion in 2013, an increase of 145% over a 10-year period.
Augmentation du taux d'échec et du coût des essais cliniques.
And there is also a high failure rate for these therapies. Monopolies also have an impact on prices.
Orphelins n'ont pas de biosimilars,
Orphan
ce qui implique une rentabilité
diseases
pharmaceutique.
find great difficulty in achieving profitability for treatments developed by the pharmaceutical industry.
D'acquisition de start-up par les big pharma.
Big Pharma buys up startups. This has mobilized $2.9 billion in funds in 2014, for example.
De fixation des prix inadéquats.
Inadequate price
des contrats.
Control mechanisms.
On remarque
contractual difficulties are among obstacles identified by experts.
D'une année pour les
the cost of extending
a quadruplé.
Cancer treatments by 1 year has quadrupled over a 4-year period. Many experts are very critical of these trends.
Un prix de l'airbag ou bien du parachute qui est supérieur au prix de l'avion ou bien
these difficulties persist. The interpreter specifies that sound quality is very difficult for this intervention. We're doing our best to interpret it and cannot guarantee full accuracy. Under the pressure applied by associations, the media, and patient groups, there are gradual improvements and moves to adopt price policies. There are no generic competitors, sometimes despite the expiry of patents on treatments, and this is another source of difficulty. Associations are calling for new methods for setting prices connected to the therapeutic value of treatments and aiming to remunerate research and development and increase profitability for the pharmaceutical sector. When it comes to setting prices, the associations have a major role to play. Differential pricing is very important also on the basis of purchasing power in order to facilitate access by the global south. An effort to fund generics is important. Health insurance is another approach, and penalties on the pharmaceutical sector when measures are not respected can also help. The French Association of Neuropathies is very active in this field. We have a series of recommendations for states banning the sale of patents by state bodies and associations, for example, conducting research according to families of conditions, harmonizing standards and unifying procedure for granting authorizations to market treatments, reinforcing the international network of associations, cooperating at the level of clinical testing with developing countries, delocalizing production of innovative medication, among others. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. We have heard very interesting testimony here.
My dear colleague Daniel Fuster, who is the head of human resources here at the OECD. We have heard a lot about how to make the workplace more accessible, more diverse. We have even heard some recommendations for next year when we will do another event like this in terms of how to make the place more accessible for persons with disabilities. Daniel will present what the OECD is currently doing in its own human resource policy in terms of improving diversity and inclusion. So please join me in welcoming Daniel with a big round of applause.
Thank you, Federico. Merci à tous et à toutes.
Thank you very much to everybody present. I am very honored to be invited to speak before you this afternoon, talking about the efforts that we're making here at the OECD.
Truly, when I say a journey, that I mean it. It's a work in construction and something in which we have to work, but where we've made some gains that I'd like to tell you about, and the systematic way in which we are approaching it. So I think that coming at the end of this very, very enriching day is kind of a challenge, because I think that you've had the opportunity during the day to talk about the challenges, opportunities to advance the agenda of disability inclusion across a variety of environments. But also, I think that it's good to understand what happens in concrete organizations like the OECD, and how all of the conversations that you've had in today resonates deeply also in the way that we run an organization like ours, and in our undertaking internally of the way that we work and we engage with talent. So at the OECD, we've started a journey, more or less in the year 2023, with the approval of our first human resources strategy in 60 years, which has a very, very important component that has to do with a stream of work on disability and neurodiversity inclusion. The overarching objective is to position OECD as an employer of choice for disabled and neurodivergent talent by embedding inclusion and accessibility principles throughout our organizational policies, practices, and ultimately the way that we work together in the organization. This initiative is central to ensuring that all individuals can express their full potential and talent and thrive at the OECD, joining us in work with us. To begin with, it's important to note that this work started with a comprehensive analysis of our internal processes, policies, and practices. For that, the goal was to assess where we currently stand and what the gap may be that is not allowing us to reach those pools of talent of people with disability and with neurodiversity that might be out there in 38 member countries. We have identified important and key opportunities of improvement, and to address this, we are working now in an action plan that will, hopefully, we will undertake in the next biennium to put some concrete actions so that it's more than words, actions that get behind what we want to achieve. How are we approaching this journey? Well, first of all, we've decided to follow three main cardinal principles in guiding this action plan. One of them, and you might have discussed it during your sessions today, has to do with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. We consider disability and neurodiversity as a natural, integral part of human diversity. And it's more a job then under this focus, under this lens of removing the barriers that impede the full expression of talent, that all of these populations, all of these, let's say, pools of talent that we have around our membership can afford us, can offer us. So from that point of view, we firmly embrace the recognition that disability is not a limitation of the individual, but rather something to tell us about the environment that we are creating for those individuals to be able to engage with us, and how we can be committed to addressing in lifting those barriers, be it digital, be it physical, or even cultural, that may hinder the full participation of candidates and talent and even staff with disabilities in the life and work of the organization. These assessments that we've carried out under this lens have told us some of the gaps that we need to fill. Some of them have to do with, for example, our recruitment platform that is not fully ready right now to interact with people that have visual impairment, or impairment in engaging with some of the regular questions that we ask a candidate. So we're working with the help of outside consultants in redesigning that accessibility factor as just one of the examples of what we're trying to do in that space to make more accessible the organization to candidates. But the second point that I want to highlight is the second pillar is how can we mainstream disability inclusion throughout our internal policies and processes more internally. Disability mainstreaming involves integrating disability considerations into all aspects of our work, ensuring that inclusion is not seen as a standalone effort, but more as a fundamental part of our everyday work. It's just like, I think about it like taking the lenses out of your face and putting the lenses of somebody else's lived experience as you think about resolving the regular problems that you tackle as an organization in the corporate world. How come some of these decisions that we take day to day in the OECD to enable the work of people have an impact on lived experiences that are different than ours? And the third one that I would like to highlight, and is one that I learned very early in my career interacting with the different employee resource groups dealing with the integration of people with disability, is the principle of nothing about us without us. That means that recognizing the essential role that individuals with disabilities must play in shaping the organization's work on disability and inclusion is key. This principle reflects on our belief that policies and initiatives impacting disabled and neurodivergent individuals must be informed by their lived experiences. And in this sense, I am pleased to share that, for example, the first thing that we're trying to pilot internally in terms of connecting our existing leadership with this type of lived experiences, our first pilot program of reverse mentoring. And I'm very proud to say that it has been very, very successful, in which we're pairing senior leaders of the OECD with people working at the OECD with some grade or degree of disability, so that we can have enriching experiences and share over the course of 6 months the way in which we can build up our leadership with this lens, with this kind of glasses that I was mentioning before as part of our living practices. In this sense, I would like to also recognize and thank our employee resource group DICE that has been working very, very strongly in implementing these type of programs like the one I'm mentioning, and many more that we have in line for the action plan over the next biennium at the OECD. So as part of our commitment to disability inclusion, we will be taking several actions, as I mentioned, to ensure more accessible and inclusive OECD. We will conduct both a digital and physical accessibility full assessment to identify these gaps that I'm mentioning, and to try to establish, low-hanging fruit that we can implement quickly, that does not require a lot of heavy lifting, but also having the medium to long-term vision of those things that will require more work over the next years to come. But the idea is that those low-hanging fruit that we have can lift the barriers to accessibility that we are sensing from this gap analysis and assessment that we will conduct. Additionally, we will work very hard, as I told my team, some of them are here today, on really approaching the reasonable accommodation or reasonable adjustment process more systematically and structurally. We've had some good experiences so far, but they're one-offs, and we want this to be a systematic approach by which candidates and people with disability can, from the recruitment process, raise their hand, tell us about what type of needs they would have coming into the job, so that we can anticipate them and work with the actual areas at the OECD that will receive them to ensure that these barriers are lifted and the best expression of their talent can be present when they join us. recruitment process, like I mentioned, we're working on that. And finally, there's a lot to be said about the capacity building of people around the OECD. It's being sensitive and understanding how to integrate the talent of people with disability and with neurodivergent backgrounds, and how we can help this management to understand and bring out the best of people, which is a big cultural piece of what I'm mentioning. In closing, I look forward to meeting you. Federico mentioned that a year from now we will be having a similar event to this, so I would be delighted to come here and tell you how we're doing in this journey, but also to keep us accountable to all of you, accountable to this organization, because it's not enough with the words of the head of human resources this afternoon here today to guarantee that this journey takes place. It has to be a process of accountability that counts with all of us, with our membership, our member countries, ourselves as management, and as individuals and human beings, trying to make a better world for everybody, which is the purpose of the OECD at the end of the day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was an excellent intervention in the end to draw it all together, and I liked what you said about accountability. And I think that's why, or my take from this day is that what we said in the beginning, let's make this an annual event, because that's going to hold us accountable. We will have to not just have one event and then not discuss the issue. I think we need a deep dive into the issue, and I can speak on behalf of the Development Center, and I know from the OECD at large that we are ready to do that and embrace this issue. And the three words plus accountability that came to my mind after listening to all of the panelists is impactful, inspiring, motivating. And Christine, a member of the European Parliament, she compared this, what do I say, this fight to the women's gender equality battle that started sooner. And I come from Iceland, where gender equality is highly regarded, but that did not happen until we embraced the power of women by giving a platform, and by the women taking charge themselves, and the role of, or the importance of role models. And I have seen very many role models here today, and I am inspired by each and every one that has come here and shared. And I think this is, I think it's a very good comparison, and it gives me hope that we can advance. And I would like also, speaking of role models, because the Paralympics have been mentioned here many times, and I had the fortune of going to watch a swimming contest competition where a local Icelandic competitor or swimmer was competing. And I can say it was almost a life-changing experience, because to see the speaking of role models and the drive and the dedication, I was thoroughly impressed. And we need to bring these role models and these impactful stories to the front of this debate. But finally, because I am very much realizing that Matthew and I and Sarah are standing in the way of the cocktail, I'd just like to give a few words of thanks. Again, to our co-organizers, the permanent mission or representation of France to the OECD. Dear Amélie, there's like some months ago when you were contacted by Mathieu, we had lunch and we decided, yes, let's do it. And we will have to, you realize we made a yearly commitment now. I want to also thank Mathieu, of course, for the idea, for the drive, for all of your input into this work. And I also want to thank all of the OECD colleagues that have contributed to this effort, the Secretary General in his office, Daniel, Human Resources, the OECD Association for Dialogue and Inclusion, Cultural Diversity and Equity, DICE, which was represented here, the Directorate of Employment, Labor and Social Affairs, Science, Technology and Innovation, conference services, interpreters, everyone, protocol, Amanda, everyone has put their efforts into making this happen, and I am very thankful. I want to thank the ONCE Foundation and the instrumental support of the Spanish delegation to the OECD to this. And last but not least, I have to thank my team. Federico has led the team, but Julia, who has been at the beck and call, Elizabeth, all of you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You've done a fantastic job. And it's a reminder, when we bring the whole of OECD together, we make magic. When we bring the whole of OECD and all of you, it's like triple magic. So I wanna stop here and again give the floor to Mathieu for your closing remarks, and then we will hear from Sarah. Thank you.
Sarah avant. C'est bon, Sarah, je te laisse, Sarah, du coup.
Sarah, I'll give you the floor first, perhaps. You can speak before I do.
Oui, merci. Alors, donc, je vais tenter de faire une pré-conclusion.
I will try to conclude and give the floor to Mathieu afterwards. I'd like to thank everybody once again for your participation and for your attention.
Toutes les interventions que nous avons.
And offer my thanks for all of the interventions today. As I said earlier, accessibility involves two issues, a material and physical dimension, enabling people with disability to go out, to have a social and professional life, to have a fulfilled personal life, because I believe that the more non-disabled people work with disabled people, the more people will become used to seeing people with disability out and about in society. It will generate new things for everybody. And I think that, as I said earlier, accessibility also needs to be integrated into all public policy. It needs to be conceptual and ideological as well as physical. For this to happen, I think we need to promote a form of participative democracy. That's already the case with certain public institutions. I'm thinking of the CDCA at the level of the French département, or nationally the CNCPH, which provides support to the government in taking political decisions and policy making. I think that sharing experience can enable this ideological integration of accessibility into thinking. Various studies have shown that experience leads to a kind of memory forming from a neuroscientific point of view. Experience is something that is encoded in memory. Without living these experiences, you don't realize where the obstacles are. So we have a need to continue these debates in institutions in terms of participative democracy. And to conclude, because we're reaching the end of this event, I wanted to talk about a discovery which really struck me when I encountered it in my doctoral research. There's a researcher in Portugal called Manuela Ralce who discovered that the higher the higher people, or the more wealthy people were, the less was their empathetic quality. And so these were two antagonistic qualities, wealth on the one hand and empathy on the others. So I think we need to work on this. Attachment requires empathy. Perhaps disability is not actually a disability, but a solution for society when you think of things in that light. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci Zara.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to all of you for this collective mobilization. Thank you to all of the high-quality panelists, very inspiring, enlightened, who have spoken this afternoon. We've heard from people with disability themselves. We've heard from actors in the associations, economic figures, political representatives. And this is exactly the kind of approach for our work and our thinking that our organization, the APHPP, advocates for. This collaborative effort involving these three sectors, which can generate acceptable, realistic, pragmatic, ambitious proposals to improve rights for disabled people. Our proposals, the proposals of the APHPP in terms of accessibility and innovation, are founded on two pillars of value and sanctions, because you do need to be able to sanction those institutions, for example, in France, who have not respected the 2005 law in France regarding accessibility, or who are dragging their feet when it comes to making their websites digitally accessible. We need to be able to promote the idea that territorial communities, local institutions and national institutions need to develop solutions and work with, or make sure that companies develop products and services that are accessible to everyone. We need to institute good practices. We need to throw the spotlight on innovative entrepreneurs today. And no doubt this is the time also to raise the issue of value by creating an accessibility label. This is one of the APHPP proposals. Going beyond France's borders to the European Union, a European fund on accessibility is important when it comes to strategies, innovation, anticipation, providing a realization of something that is underexploited and not properly recognized today. Once again, thank you to the entire team of the OECD who have made it possible to rise to the challenge of organizing this event. You've come a long way, but it's very important to push the envelope internally within organizations to look at these subjects. Great thank you to the French ambassador, Amélie de Montchalin. Without you, this would not have been possible. Sometimes we do need to turn to people who can create a spark and set off a process. We hope very much that this movement started within the OECD will continue. We'll count on you to continue to support us, and I think that we can safely say, see you here again next year at the same time. This international cooperation is extremely important, as we said in the introduction, when we heard the worldwide figures. But it is also something that requires true reciprocity. I was really struck. I couldn't make a better summary conclusion than Jemima to the third round table. Promoting accessibility technology, but not forgetting the human dimension. In the context of international cooperation, no doubt developed countries can have something to contribute to developing countries, but on the other hand, we can greatly inspire ourselves from cultures, particularly in Africa, for whom, and I've been able to experience this directly many times, the human dimension, goodwill towards people living with disability is very characteristic. For our industrialized developed countries, we have perhaps lost sight of this idea of involving everybody. Perhaps
d'autonomie des personnes handicapées.
this reflects a real legitimate desire of people with disability for autonomy, but that autonomy should not lead us to neglect the fact that this is a collective society context where we are experiencing crisis, tension, and so on, but we should not oppose people with disability with people or against people without disability. It's not part of the population against another part of the population. We can all work together to overcome the divides in society.
Thank you very much for all of your discussions, and thank you.
Merci beaucoup à tous.
Thank you to all of you.
Refreshments and cocktail for those who want. Il y a un petit cocktail qui est servi juste à la sortie. Je remercie les équipes de l'OCDE, nombreuses et mobilisées pour les échanges, et une suite qui sera donnée pour voir comment tout ce travail peut aussi plus rentrer dans les travaux de l'OCDE elle-même. So for all of you, just the cocktail is just out, and thank you very much to all the teams of the Conference Center et à tous nos collègues pour leur soutien dans cette organisation. Merci beaucoup.